What's up, witches? How we doing? Welcome to another taping of season 3 of the BetterWitch podcast. I'm excited to have you guys in the room. Today we are going to be meeting with Kathryn and talking about being a seasonal witch, working with the seasons in your magic, which is super dope, super exciting. Before Emma gets with us, we're going to do our usual. You guys know you are my unpaid producers of the show, okay? So you're going to make sure that our sound and everything is all good. We're going to do our intro and all of that fun stuff. So I see a couple of you coming in the building. Say what's up. Say what's up in the chat when you come in. Well, I get us queued up here for a little intro action. Let me know if you can hear me. Can you see me? Hey, Valentonia, welcome. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Are we all good? How we doing? Yes and yes. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Okay. All right. We'll see who joins us. I don't think I posted about this filming. It's been listed in the upcoming. So hopefully folks got a chance to see. I sent out an email to my newsletter. So definitely sign up for my newsletter if you haven't already, so you know what's going on. Everything Bronx Witch. The link to the newsletter is in the description of this video. And on my website, bronxwitch.com/BronxWitch. So let's bang out the intro before our wonderful guest joins us. All right, here we go. What's up, witches? Welcome to season 3 of the BetterWitch podcast, presented by the Beyond BronxWitch YouTube channel. I'm your host, Alysha Kravetz. I'm a tarot reader, Reiki master, and owner of BronxWitch HeadQuarters, a spiritual shop and workshare space in the Bronx, New York. This season, I'll be coming to you every week with a new topic and a new guest co-host to share our real-life experiences as practicing witches. Because when we know better, we witch better. Today's guest co-host is Kathryn. Emma is a witch and obeah woman who lives in Nottinghamshire, UK. She is also an author, writing for a number of websites and in-print magazines, including Gods and Radicals and Witchway magazine, with a focus on magic, witchcraft, Afro-Caribbean practices, and folklore. You can find Emma at EmmaKathrynWildWitchcraft.com. All right, let me know how that's going. We've got Shop Witch Alexis busy in the shop, packing up orders in the background. I can hear her, but a lot of times the things I can hear, you guys can't hear. So let me know if you could hear that at all. Let me know. How did that sound? Let me turn my phone off. Can you hear the taping and boxing going on? By the way, we're having a huge 30% off sale in the shop as a thank you for reaching 3,000 followers on the shop Instagram page. Yes. And very excited about that. So definitely check out bronxwitch.com/shop. Go visit the shop if you want to take advantage of that. We don't usually do sales that big. So. You sound a little nasally. Do I? I'm okay. I'm a little under the weather. I woke up this morning a little scratchy. I had my fire cider and some not today Satan tea. So I'll keep doing that all day to make sure I don't actually get sick. But yeah, I was feeling a little under the weather. Okay, a little nasally, but no noise from the background. Okay, that is good news. Very good news. All right, awesome. Let's see. Let's let the people know. So many messages to catch up to. All right, smile, everybody. No, I'm just kidding. You're not on camera. Ow. Season 3 going down. I always forget like what the link to the channel is. How do you do that? I think it's I'm too goofy for internet stuff. It's supposed to be serious and I just can never handle it. YouTube.com at BronxWitch. All right. How's everybody doing, by the way? Enjoying springtime? We are going through, well, we just got out of what folks lovingly call our third winter in New York. Because our winter spring season tends to like go back and forth kind of dramatically, honestly. Where like it'll be winter and then all of a sudden it's like springtime, it's like 60 degrees, and then all of a sudden it's winter again. So you think you're about to get like, some rest, some relaxation, some reprieve, is that the word? From the winter, and then boom, it's back to being cold again. So that happened to us last week. It was like all of a sudden like 25 degrees in the morning, and then now it's come back around, and it's like, okay, I think it's going to be spring for real now. It's like 50 degrees, so it should be good. So while folks are coming in the building, I will remind you all we are recording another episode for season 3 of the BetterWitch podcast. This is my podcast. I can't believe we're in our third season now, where we sit down and talk with experienced witches about different areas of the craft. And we focus in on how they embarked on their journeys, and kind of more importantly, if they could do their journeys all over again, what would they change? Because my goal as a practitioner who's been doing this for over 25 years is to make it a lot easier for the next witch. You don't have to make the mistakes. You don't have to go through the same trial and error. You don't have to have the same up and downs that the witch that came before you did. The idea and the benefit of having experienced witches in your lives, even if they're just in your virtual lives, is that hopefully you can gain some mentorship and some education from them so that your journey as a witch is a lot smoother, a lot easier. And that's my prayer for all of you guys. So as you come in the building, definitely make sure to say hello in the comments, hang around, because we're going to be talking to a fantastic guest co-host, an experienced practitioner all about their experience with seasonal magic so that your road through incorporating the seasons into your practice can be a lot easier and a lot smoother. We're going to talk with Emma Kathryn today. If you're just coming in the building, I already shared a little bit of her background and her bio. And at the end, you're going to get the opportunity to ask some questions. So if you can't stick around for the whole live, make sure to drop your questions in the chat or at the top of the Q&A box all over on YouTube. One of the benefits of watching these live tapings on YouTube is that you get to ask questions. The question portion is not included in the episode when it airs on podcast platforms. So definitely take advantage of that and make sure to drop your questions down below. It looks like our esteemed guest co-host, Emma Kathryn, is in the building. So I'm going to go ahead and bring her into the room. Hey, Emma, how are you?
I am very well. Hello. Thank you for having me.
It's so great to have you.
Oh no, I'm so excited to be on. Like, I love your show, so it's all good. Very excited.
It's great to have you here. Let me make sure all of our sound and good stuff is on. One second. So I see something here. My recording is so funny because sometimes it wants to cooperate and sometimes it does not. Okay. Okay, cool. Very cool. You can hear me and see me okay, right?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're good. It is telling me that it's not on my microphone for sound. It's on the computer for sound. I'm not sure why. Let me see. Okay, well, I guess that's just how we're going to be today. All right, yeah, it won't let me change that. Okay. All right, cool. Well, thank you so much for being with me. I really appreciate you popping into the room. I have, seen you like everywhere. It feels like you do so many conferences and, witchy conventions, some in person, some virtually, and things like that. And that's really cool for me. I feel like I've known you already because I've seen you in so many different places. So it's such an honor. And I'm really excited to have you here with us. I've shared a little bit about what this podcast is all about through, my email to you and talking to you and sharing the background information of what motivated me to start this show and what we like to focus on. But I think the most important thing to know is that we're a little different from some shows that are more like of an interview. We really encourage our guest co-hosts, which we call guest co-hosts, to chat with us freely, to lead the direction and, lead the conversation in any direction that you want it to go. So if there's something you want to share, something you want to talk about that I haven't, already brought up, feel free to interrupt me, talk over me, and really make sure that, you share what is on your heart and in your mind, because the goal of this show is to help witches go about their journey better. That's why we call it the Better Witch. It's my mission, it's my purpose to to help folks who call themselves baby witches or feel like they're alone, or they might be a little overwhelmed or have confusion in their journey, to go about their walk in a much smoother and guided way. And I think that can be hard for us to find as solitary witches, to find guidance, to find mentorship, to find direction, without initiating into a group or something like that. So I want to provide resources that allow it to be a little bit easier for solitaries to feel like they have good, solid information, and folks that they can turn to for more knowledge and more guidance. So that's kind of our vibe. I am doing something called local recording. So that means that we're live streaming right now on YouTube, but I'm also recording our sound individually so that this can all be edited and made pretty and released on podcast platforms a little later in April. So to that regard, if you don't mind, and I'll remind you of this at the end of the episode, but when you leave the studio, there's going to be an indication that you need to wait a few minutes for your sound to finish uploading. So if you don't mind not closing out your browser or shutting down your computer until it gives you the little green light that everything is okay.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much. So as I was saying, I gave everybody your bio and your introduction before you came into the room. So folks are a little bit familiar with what you do, where you're from, and all of that good stuff. But something that might have stood out to them that they may not be super familiar with is a word in your bio, and that word is obia. And obia is something that I didn't know about until many years into my own journey. And it's been something that I've learned more about over that time. But it's not necessarily a type of practice that folks maybe outside of the Caribbean or out of ATR practices will have heard of. And that might have been, one of the things in the bio that made them scratch their head or perk up their ears. What is that? She's an obia woman. What is that all about? And so, because I definitely feel like it's relevant to your perspective on your practice, your craft, and on how you approach seasonal magic, I was actually hoping we would start there, if you don't mind, kind of telling us a little bit more about what obia even is, and how you've come to be an obia woman.
Oh, of course. I mean, I can talk to anyone about this all the time, so absolutely. And like yourself, it was something I was already well established in my witchcraft practice when I came upon obia, or in a more kind of familiar way. And it's funny because it was my dad really who's not like into anything magical, but he is Jamaican. He was born in Jamaica, and he came over to Britain when he was a kid. I can't remember how old, but I think he's around 7, 8, 9, around that kind of age. And he was looking at my bookshelf one day, or one of my many bookshelves, and he was like, "Oh, you've got all of these like books on English magic." He's like, "Where's the obia?" And so that really was my, because I'd kind of heard of it and vaguely knew what it was, but never really in any deep way. And so really that was my input, because I thought, well, where is it? Where are they? In truth, there are very few. And so much of my journey into obia was learning about it through the way we all learn about things, through secondhand or many hand later old fashioned texts. There's not really a lot of resources out there. And then I happened to go to an old family friend's house, and as I was already well established with witchcraft, and I was just in the house, and there were little things over the course of time that kind of stood out to me, because I always feel like the tools of magic are always quite similar, regardless of tradition or practice, because they are tools and they help achieve a purpose.
Yeah.
And so Yeah, and so I was in the house. I was kind of looking around at things, and I'm like, that looks like a bit of an altar, this looks like this, is this? And after a while, I kind of approached the subject with them, but through my own practice, I was like, oh, I've got an altar aim. It looks kind of similar to this. Do you do anything? And it kind of came from there. And then I just booked them for a long time to teach me.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's kind of basically it. But I think if it hadn't have been from my knowledge of witchcraft already, and I was just like, it was just those little observations and just placements of things and things that, like, you might not be able to really put your finger on, but if you know, you
Mhm,
know.
mhm. Facts.
And
Yeah,
so
witches always have their way of sort of being obvious if you know what you're looking for. Um,
yeah,
I find that really interesting that, your father, as you say, is Jamaican and so has this knowledge of Obia, but it was actually like a family friend that you learned more of the practice from. And
yeah, and it
so,
it was like a while later as well, like almost like, I'd learned about it, but it was just like a learning. 'Cause I think most witches are kind of curious about different forms of magic, and we all like our own little bits of research. And so, at first it was just that kind of thing, like a little side project that kind of, looked into my heritage a little bit. And actually, by the time, months later, when, I'd started to put these thoughts together, that was almost like at second hand. It was
mhm.
almost not a so it was a kind of a happy coincidence, I think.
Yeah. Well, I find it so interesting that, like, a lot of these practices that our families know about and engage in, they don't necessarily make a real effort to like teach to their children and pass on to their children. And I can understand a lot of the reasons why. Certainly, everything from it potentially being dangerous
Hmm.
to do so, practices not being, welcomed or seen in very positive light, down to, perhaps personal shame or aversion. I know there were a lot of practices in my family that didn't get continued because they were seen as like, oh, that's country, that's old school, we're trying to be modern, we're trying to assimilate into American society, like we don't do that kind of stuff anymore, kind of a thing. So that's, I feel like it's unfortunate because I'm like, no, teach us these things. But I'm glad that you were able to find somebody, that could teach you that. Now that you have had this like exposure to Obia, do you now see it more in your family, or are you able to talk about these topics more? Like if you go to Jamaica or you connect with your father's family, are you able to like have that conversation with them now, or is it something that
Um,
your family has like stepped away from?
Uh, Not really. I do really think that I was quite lucky. And like I say, if I had never have broached that subject, or if I had never have known, what I was looking at, I don't think I'd ever have found someone to teach me. And that's the truth of it.
Yeah,
So I was really, really lucky. But it's not something that people talk about in a very serious way.
right.
It's almost like they're afraid generally, and I find it's the same when you talk about any kind of occult or esoteric tradition with people, but on a serious level where you're talking about it seriously and rather than like entertainment or just that kind of thing. I think once you get past all of the, because I think a lot of that, all of the jokes, like people who are you know non practitioners, or
Mhm. The
mainstream
muggle.
or whatever, yeah, the muggles. you know I think once you get, we've all had those questions of, oh, what, all the silly questions that you get, like, can you do this, or can you do that, or does it mean this, or does it mean that, and I think a lot of that masks some of the more I don't know, the deeper fears that people have about such things, because then once you begin to talk about it in a serious way, people, tend to shy away from it if they're not naturally interested in it anyway, and I always think, if you didn't actually believe in it in some way, then why are you so afraid of it? Because, so I think that generally people tend to shy away from those topics anyway, beyond the elements that kind of make it into mainstream media, and into the mainstream culture, like, oh, I just had an example in my mind and it's gone. I'm sure it'll come back. But there's lots of examples. Oh, like, the secret books. I used to
Yeah.
work a lot in a bookshop, and they were always popular. And, the law of attraction books, which, is kind of watered down, hermeticism and magic
Hmm.
and occult thought and ideas. And I think, other than where it's made acceptable, I do think people tend to shy away from it. And it's the same with Obia, and people finding people to talk openly about it in a way that is open and maybe not based on fears, and stuff like that. Because I think when you look at, like, I'm a folklore nerd, and I love all kinds of folklore from all over the world, because I think we learn so much from it. And I think that when we learn about folklore, we learn how much our cultures, wherever we're from, and even if we have a mixture of cultures, we learn just how much those stories and that knowledge kind of leans into magical thought and ideas. So it's things like funerary rites. You see, every culture has them, and quite often it's to do with the soul and the spirit and all of that kind of thing. And there's lots of ways that people, and lots of practices that people do for lots of different reasons, and not necessarily know why they do them. It's almost become superstition, but actually they have their roots in magical thought and practice.
Right.
And so I think it's my exploration of Obia has been a learning curve, because when you're kind of wanting to find personal experience, you know, um, people aren't necessarily willing to go that deep into it, or to it's very secretive. It's um and like you say, there's lots of different reasons for doing that.
Hmm.
And sometimes people just don't know. They do these practices that they've inherited within their culture, but we don't know why we do them. Like, blowing out candles on a birthday cake. Why do we do it? Who knows? Where did it start? Who knows? But it's something we do anyway. And I think there's lots of traditions and lots of cultures that people practice, but like I say, have their so I think sometimes when you go about exploring things, you have to go about it in a different way, and maybe come in from a different perspective. It's not necessarily so straightforward. But I think
Hmm.
that's, like I said, I'm a nerd and I love that kind of stuff. I think that's what makes it exciting. So,
Yeah, I love folklore as well too, and like the mythos around certain like spirits or energies or deities that people work with, because not only is it fascinating, but it is really telling. And I think, like you, what you can't help but notice the more you educate yourself about folklore are all of these common threads between cultures and between practices around the world that I think really serve, as the foundation of like why these things matter. To me, it's very telling that people on opposite sides of the planet could be doing the same thing, doing the same practice or perceiving the world in the same way. They don't communicate with each other, they don't speak the same language. Now it's different. Obviously, we have the internet, but in a world pre-internet or pre even telephone, how are people on different sides of the planet looking to the sun and doing the same things, or spending time in nature and doing a lot of the same traditions, a lot of the same practices getting developed. I think that's really fascinating, but also really telling of the truth of what is going on. And something interesting that you mentioned is perspective. And I think perspective is so important. And so I'm wondering how what you've learned about Obia has impacted, if it has, like your perspective on seasonal magic, because Obia comes to us from the Caribbean, right, where there aren't necessarily so many seasons, and now you live in the UK where there
Mhm.
are. And so, how do the two, though I've heard some folks from the UK be like, we don't really have seasons either. It's just like cold rain or warm rain. And then that's it. But it's more seasonal, perhaps than the Caribbean. So, like, how have the two come together for you as somebody who really, relies on nature a lot in their practice?
Hmm. I think for me, and so I also practice traditional British witchcraft as well. And I always say it's a mixture that fully represents my heritage. And I think what's really allowed me to, because I say it as though they're two separate practices, and I think a lot of people can relate. We all have different things that we can slot into different categories, but actually they all combine into a practice that is ours, and it's uniquely ours. And so although I make those distinctions for ease of understanding, actually sometimes it's hard to separate where one ends and where the other begins, especially because, like I say, you use a lot of the same tools or very similar tools for very similar reasons. A fire pot is a fire pot, so a lot of the tools are the same. But I think for me, what's really helped me to connect them, and I think it feeds into the seasons and all of that, which I'll come to in a moment, is animism. And so for me, I always describe animism as the idea or belief that, and for me, it's the things in the natural world, the plants, the trees, the flora and fauna that we share this space with. They all are alive with spirit and soul in much the same way that we are. Doesn't mean that they are conscious in the same way we are, but it means they're alive, they're living, and it's that animating spark. It's what makes things alive, even if we don't necessarily have the words to describe it. And I think the words that we do try to describe it are all different from all over the world. I personally think that quite often they're trying to describe that same animating spark, that same life force that every living thing shares, but is manifested so differently in all of the unique things in the world. And I think animism really allows me to connect with spirit in a way that I think you can only connect to the land where you live and where you're present at the moment, regardless of all of the political and blooded history that comes from that. Actually, in this moment, you are there, and that's the only land at the moment that you've got to connect with. So I think that for me, animism is a way of connecting to where you are in any given time and any given moment. It's connecting to that spark, that life force that is manifest in all living things, and for me, so when I think then of practicing obeah away from the Caribbean, I always think of the evolution of practices. So, a brief history of obeah is it has many different origin stories. Some people will say it has its origins in Jewish mysticism and the Kabbalah. Other people will tell you it has its origins in Africa and Egypt. So my understanding of it has its origins in West Africa, and that's where we find it transported to the Caribbean and further afield through the slave trade,
Right. That's my understanding as well.
Yeah. So that's my kind of understanding of it. And so when we think of, and it's the same, I think, with Haitian Badoon, you see the same kind of evolution of the practice based on the terrible times the people who practiced it went through. And I think that's really important, because when people go through such drastic and often traumatic events, I think their practice shifts and shapes to become what they need in that moment. And so you see it very clearly in Haitian Badoon, where you see the different nations of the lower. For example, you have the Petra and the Rada. The Rada are often seen as the original or the cooler aspects from the original places in Africa, whereas in Haiti, the history of Haiti again is very much similar to Jamaica, very traumatic and steeped in bloodshed and colonialism and slavery. And as such, the people who carried their practice with them, they needed their lower to become fiery and fighters and hot natured for the new circumstances that they found themselves in. And I think
Right.
we can see the same in Obia. So, it has its origins in West Africa, but because, the people who carried it to the Caribbean had undergone such a traumatic time, their practice became what they needed it to be at that time. And so even there we can see that people might not have had access to the resources that they were used to. And I often point to Queen Nanny of the Maroons as a kind of aside to this story, because I think she highlights it perfectly. She was a Ghanaian woman brought to Jamaica through slavery, and she's now she's remembered as a Jamaican national hero. Because she fought against the British, led revolts and uprisings, and was ultimately successful in securing freedom for her people. She was a noted Abia woman, a military leader, and she defeated the British better equipped and better paid for army with guerrilla warfare tactics, with lesser quality weapons, and also a knowledge of the land and of the plants that grew there. There's stories of how she would camouflage fighters based on her knowledge of, the plants around and all kinds of things. And I think that just shows that actually traditions are adaptable because they're carried by the people who practice them. And ultimately, people are survivors and they make use of what they have. And again, I always point to our enslaved ancestors. What would they have had to practice with? It would have been so very little. And so I think, for me, the animism aspect and just the very nature of how practices shape and shift to suit the needs of those who practice them in the time, I think, and so I always encourage people to explore different ways of doing things and how they can kind of bring what they know already and kind of adapt it to where they are. Or, I think that's applicable to everyone, no matter what they practice. But yeah, I think for me, that's been key in really bringing out OBA to the fore in a way where it's not kind of something that is just different or separate, or it's more of a practice that is part of my life just as much as witchcraft is. And like I said, sometimes there's very little difference. If I'm being really lazy, I'll often just describe it as Afro-Caribbean witchcraft or a magical system, because it does have that magical system. It also has that spiritual system. So I know people who practice Obia who maybe don't practice the spiritual side, and it's just the magical side, much like we do in witchcraft. I often say that it's like, lots of different folk practices that might be divorced from any religious proceedings, even though they might ultimately have stemmed from them, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. And for those listening and watching who are not familiar with the concept of animism, what Emma is talking about is the idea that all things have a living energy. And while they might not have a consciousness, and certainly might not have the proper parts for communicable languages, they might not have vocal boxes and mouths, and things of this nature, or even brains to like think about things, that there is a life force and a life energy in all things. And I think that, I was going to bring this up later, but I'm glad that you bring it up now, because it is so important, I think, to what underlies pretty much all magical practices. The idea that all things have a living energy, I think, is one of the things that connects all of these different traditions and cultures around the world, that are spiritual or that are magical in nature. And I offer a magic intensive to witches that want to become better witches. It's a semester long program, and one of the things that I tell them, when deciding whether or not we're going to work together, is that, like, animism is one of those things that, I'm not here to convince you of. And if you are still at that place where you need to be convinced of that, then the program is probably not right for you, because that is something that I think no one can tell you. No one can tell you that a tree is alive. No one can tell you that that rock has a living energy. That is really something that you need to go and experience for yourself and feel for yourself. And if you hold a rock, you sit by a tree, you sit by a river, and you don't feel a life force that is similar to your own, then magic is probably going to be really confusing, and it's just going to be a series of steps that you follow with no understanding and probably no result. Because these are magic and spirituality, which obviously the two are not the same, but both of them, I think, really at their heart, come from a place of knowing that you are not the only life force around you, that there's energy and all of the things around you, that energy can be connected with, it can be identified, you can build a relationship with it. And then once those three things happen, you can affect change in parts of life or parts of the world that maybe you're not physically connected to, because you are energetically connected through the life force of the things around you. And I don't think anybody can really teach you that. I feel like you have to kind of explore that on your own. And I want to talk more about how witches can explore that on their own. So we are going to take a quick little commercial break. This is a great time for the witches to refill their teas, go to the little witches room, and take a little break. And I'm going to share some information with our better witches. And then we'll be back in about 2 minutes with more from Emma Kathryn on being a better seasonal witch. All right. All right, guys, let's jump into our commercial break. A quick reminder for those of you who are watching, Emma is going to take questions at the end of our chat in just a little bit. So if you have any questions about animism, working with nature, obia, seasonal magic, and any of the other topics that we are talking about, now would be a great time to drop them in the chat. There's also a Q&A box at the top of the chat. If you want to put your question up there, that's cool too. One of the benefits of watching the behind the scenes live tapings here on the Beyond BronxWitch YouTube channel is that you get to participate in the Q&A, which is a portion of our chat that won't be included when this episode airs on podcast platforms. So definitely take advantage of the fact that you get to chat with Emma today and drop your questions down below. Thank you so much. Arcana Mystery says your lives are the best. Thank you. I do what I can out here. Thanks, my dear. Glad to see you. It's good to see you. Thanks for being here. Are you ready to level up from baby witch to better witch? Enroll in the BetterWitch Magic Intensive Coaching Program. Unveil the power of self-realization, meditation, rituals, and more. Elevate your practice with live classes and one-on-one sessions with me, Alysha Kravetz. Plus, enjoy exclusive perks, including almost $1,000 in savings on magical products and services. And you get the BetterWitch Magic Intensive Kit, which contains over $200 worth of tools and goodies to help you from baby witch to better witch in just 6 months. Don't miss your chance to become a better witch. Enrollment for the fall semester is now open, and you can learn more at bronxwitch.com/coaching. Shameless plug. All right, let's see. When was that? Quick note, 43:30. All right, let's say 42. Cool. All right, and we are back, Better Witches. And I wanted to pick up the conversation, right where we were kind of leaving off, which was talking about how witches can actually make this connection with nature and with the seasons, which is, what Emma has written about. I have a copy here of Season Songs, Rediscovering the Magic and the Cycles of Nature, Emma's newest book out from Llewellyn. Shout out to Llewellyn. And I imagine that you talk about this, all in the book, or I know that you talk about this all in the book. But for folks who maybe haven't gotten a copy yet, I do want to share with them some of your thoughts on how witches can go about fostering that connection with the living energy and the things around them. I personally think that that's easier with nature. I think it's a little easier to feel the living energy in a tree than perhaps in, like, a stool in your room, that may be also made out of wood. But it might be a little bit more difficult for folks to make that connection. So for witches out there who are trying to uh, figure this whole thing out, like, I don't know, I look at a tree and it doesn't seem alive to me, or I look at a rock and I don't understand what they're talking about, that there's a living energy in this. How did you go about connecting with nature in this way, where you felt like the living force of what we would call, like, I guess, inanimate things
Yeah.
became reality for you?
So, what really inspired me to write season songs was that I think so. Some of it is based on the Wheel of the Year, and actually, the Wheel of the Year is one of those frustrating things where because it's very much based on the Western European and British agricultural cycle. So, if you don't live in a place that doesn't match the Sabbats or what they should be at that particular time, then I think that you can feel disillusioned. And so for me, rediscovering the magic in the cycles of nature and the seasons is about learning what that's like for you where you live. I think we sometimes get caught up with the labels and about what things represent and what they should be. And there's never any real clear, this is this and that is that. There's lots of different pointers and there's lots of different ways things were done in lots of different ways that might have been similar. But, there's no one true definition of this is this and that is that when it comes to, what people did at the Sabbats. And people were doing lots of different things and maybe calling it, that maybe they had similar names or maybe the practices were quite similar. And so we today tend to lump them all into like, oh, people did this in Beltane or people did that at Samhain, when really individuals and local communities might have had their own individual practices that were similar to the next towns or the next villages. And again, so you see again that evolution of practice throughout different places by different peoples based on the land where they live. And so for me, what's been really important is connecting to where we find ourselves, no matter where that is. It is easier with nature. And I always think nature abhors a vacuum. So there's always nature, no matter where you live. It's just a case of getting to know where it is in your land. And I think we can only really do that by allowing ourselves the time and space to go out without really the pressure and expectation of something happening straight away. And so throughout the book, there's lots of exercises that's just about slowing down, observing what's going on over a period of time. But in order to do that, you have to break it down into each individual outing, because I think sometimes if you look at the bigger picture, you get too caught up in wanting to get to that end place. When I really think the journey is the destination in and of itself, and so for me, it's about getting out into the land where we live in very simple ways. If you've got a garden, great, you can spend however much time you have free to you in your garden. And sometimes I think even finding the time to do that can be people's biggest hurdle, because everybody's so busy. We've all got different expectations. You might have work, you might have, all of these different things, family, lots of different things that all kind of pull on your time and drain your energy because you're so busy putting your energy into those things. So, and I think the biggest thing that witches often do to harm their practice is that they don't give it enough time and energy in the first place, because it's always, the thing that gets pushed to the side whenever some other need becomes urgent and you have to focus on that instead. And so I feel like, especially for people who have lots labor intensive jobs and maybe you do a hard labor shift for 12 hours and you come home and the last thing you want to do is then spend an hour or two on some ritual or connecting to a tree or a rock or something, and
Right.
you might just want to go home, eat your food, and just relax before you have to do it all again the next day. And
Right.
so, for lots of different reasons, our practice gets pushed to the side. And I think just giving yourself that time and space is the most important thing, without feeling guilty about it as well. You have to go whatever time you can make available to yourself. We have to optimize it so that we're going into it with the right kind of energy, I think, because we do feel guilty whenever we tend to do something for ourselves, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and so for me, it can be as simple as one of the things that I've always done, and I think has impacted me a lot. And it's really allowed me to get to know my own small patch of land throughout the year, and then you can see those changes, is I take my morning coffee outside every morning, like regardless of the weather. Sit on my porch. If it's cold, I might have my dressing gown on or even my coat, you know. But, you know, you sit there and you drink your coffee and it's really relaxing, and you're giving yourself that kind of space and energy to wake up. And I think even if you wake up 10 minutes earlier, if you have to set your alarm 10 minutes earlier to give yourself the time to do that, I think ultimately it's worth it. But doing that, eventually you come to it, it allows you to decompress, and once you're decompressed in that space, I think that's when you can begin to feel that you're opening up to the connections to what's around you. Because before that, before you're all tensed and maybe you're thinking about the working day ahead, or maybe, you know, it takes time to kind of get into that headspace. So I think sometimes we have to be a bit kind to ourselves. So I always say that the first steps we should take is maybe have a look at what we're doing. Where can we find some time that's quality time for us? You know, and I think we have to expect to sacrifice something, unfortunately. But I always think, look at what you're sacrificing. You know, 10 minutes sleep in the morning is nothing, or maybe, you know, 10 minutes staying up at night time, or, you know, and this is where it can become individual, so it fits into you. It's just having that, giving yourself that time, and so you can just, even if it's just standing outside your front door and noticing, you know, how the light changes through the course of the morning, as, you know, dawn breaks, or in the evening as, you know, nighttime begins to fall, noticing, you know, the little rhythms that are just going on, very mundane things at first, like when the birds wake up, or when you notice it's really quiet, or there's lots of different things you begin to notice and pick up about that very small patch of space. And once you begin to get familiar with that, it gives you the confidence to kind of explore a little bit more. And I think learning is a process where we base it on what we know, but then we expand it outwards into more abstract areas. And so it then becomes a natural kind of rhythm that, I don't know, it becomes more familiar. And because you've made that time and you get into the habit of having that time, it just naturally opens up yourself to be more open in that space and time. So it has that knock on cumulative effect, you know. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think the first thing we should do is just have a look at what we're doing and give ourselves some time. I think give as much time as you can, but it can be as little as 5 minutes in the morning if you're really pressed for time, you know.
For sure. Yeah. And I think that one of the, the things that I think it's important for new witches in particular to understand, because I think once you've been doing the witch thing for a while, this probably doesn't have to be explained to you. But like, when you make relationships with anything, whether it's relationships with nature, relationships with deities, relationships with your ancestors, when you make these relationships, it dramatically impacts your life in a positive way. So rather than thinking of it as, like you mentioned, making a sacrifice, for me, it's not a sacrifice to take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, whatever it is, to spend time in nature, or to spend time at an altar, or to spend time with my cards, or in prayer, or doing a ritual, casting a spell. All of these things for me are just as important as those 10 minutes of sleep. They're just as important as, going out with my friends. They're just as important as a self-care day. They're just as important as going to work, quite frankly. The relationship that you build as a practitioner is not just something that you do. Becomes a part of who you are, and it changes your life, and it changes your life for the better. And that's something that I want new witches to understand, who are maybe at this point just kind of doing the motions. and doing activities, and maybe don't really see, like, okay, why should I lose a little sleep to stay up with the moon? Like, why should I, not go right home from work and spend 10 minutes in the park? Like, what is this really going to do for me? At first, it might not be very obvious how
Yeah.
this is going to shift things for you in your life, and all of the blessings, all of the abundance, all of the amazing things it's going to do for you. So I think it's important to hear from witches who've been doing this for a while what those benefits have been, so that
Yeah.
people are like, ah, okay, so you know what, taking the time to do this is actually going to impact my life in a positive way, because we need results. I tell wishes, like, we do a lot of talking about, like, all of the ceremony and the things that we do, but at the end of the day, I really like to focus on the results. I'm not a witch. I don't practice magic. I don't do witchcraft because I have nothing better to do on a Tuesday afternoon, and I have more time than you. I make the time because doing these things has dramatically changed my life for the better. So I'd love to hear from you how witchcraft, connecting with nature, orienting your craft around the shifts of the seasons, connecting with the spirits of the natural world around you, has changed your life and benefited your life. And why is any of this worth it?
Yeah. And I think you're right. At first, when you maybe don't understand those connections, it can feel very much like a sacrifice, You know, you might think, oh, I'm really tired tonight, so I can't be bothered to do this. I just want to sit down. And sometimes we have to make ourselves feel a little bit uncomfortable until, I always equate it to doing exercise. When you start your exercise journey and you're unfit and it is uncomfortable, the
Yeah,
minimal exercise can be uncomfortable because you're not used to it, but it's
yeah,
beneficial. And actually, after a week, that minimal exercise is no longer uncomfortable because you are used to it, and not
right.
only are
And
you
you
used
start seeing results,
Yes,
which
and
is
not
the
only are
important
you used to it, but you're stronger from it and you feel better and you're starting to see those results. So I feel like it's the same with magic and witchcraft. And for me, you know, um, it's very much centered around nature and spirit work, because for me all of those things intermingle. And one of the benefits of witchcraft is actually it allows you to see that all of the interconnections between different things, because I think as humans we tend to put everything in little boxes and separate it as we move through the day, because in
part.
part it's how our brains organize all of the masses of information that they are constantly taking in through the senses.
Yeah,
It
right.
makes them easier to process that. But actually, when we get used to doing that, it gives us kind of tunnel vision, so we don't see how this one thing here can affect this other thing right up here that might seem so totally unrelated. And I think there's lots of magical philosophy that kind of goes into all of that, and it's fascinating to explore. I think the benefits, though, are there's so many, aren't there, really? I think individually as a person, I feel it makes you, when you're at that point where you have those relationships and you feel secure and you feel you're reaping the benefits of all of that hard work. I think it's easy to forget the struggles in the easier parts sometimes, until we get then maybe hit a plateau or we come up against something that we have to work against. Because I think that's what witchcraft is, and magic is, it's always evolving and it's always making us evolve as individuals as well. And I think ultimately that's the main benefit, magically speaking, even as individual people on a very mundane level. It seeps through into all of those different areas, because all of those categories we have, they're not solid and they all seep and blend into each other. And it's where does one end and the other begin, I think, is always a question I ask myself when I'm beginning to explore these things. But ultimately we have to put in the work to build those relationships. And I always see, I think of them as friendships. When you think about, you make a new friend and you go through all of those things that you do to get to know them. And as you get to know them better, that relationship gets deeper. And as that relationship gets deeper, you're more willing to maybe make sacrifices or to go the extra mile for them because they're your friend and you care about them. And you're more willing to kind of do things that you might not want to do, or you might not do for somebody who you care less about. And I think it's the same, building those connections in magic and with nature and in animism as well, because if you think about all of the things that we use, even the tools that we use, they all come from nature. All of the herbs that we might use, or the plant parts we might use. And I think what Obeah has specifically kind of taught me, the one thing that I can definitely kind of say this comes from Obeah for me, that it didn't necessarily from the witchcraft practice I had before, and this is where I think Obeah has infused it, is that so if I use the example of sage for cleansing, for example, you might grab some sage, and we've all done it in the past when we've been new. You might buy your sage from wherever, you might try and grow it, but you get your sage and you burn it to cleanse, and you burn it and jobs are good, and or so you think. But actually, in Obeah, and I think it's quite similar to several indigenous practices, because Obeah in the Caribbean also has elements from the indigenous peoples of the Caribbean at the time as well. So one of the elements is how you work with plants, and in particular the songs and chants that you sing and the intent you put into the growing of them or the harvesting of them before you even get to preparing them for the ritual and the spell itself. It's those things that go into the intentions and the will, and all of the little things that go into the preparation. That's, although they're all little individual steps, it goes into the purpose of why you're growing that plant or harvesting that plant before you even get to using the plant, and so for me, I think that's where the connection with nature and the animism really helps to imbue our witchcraft practice and make it deeper, because we're connecting with those plants, the life force of it, and so for me it works on a magical and a spiritual level, and that's where ultimately the strongest magics come from, I feel, personally anyway. So that's kind of how I look at it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. And I think for me, just to share like my experience with connecting with nature and the seasons and why it matters for me, I feel like the spirits of nature are messengers.
Yes,
And,
absolutely.
because they have been here for so long. And I especially think about trees in particular when I think about this, and just, the fact that we still have trees on this, planet that have been here for hundreds of years, and the things that they've seen, being an African American and thinking about the tragedies around trees, and the deaths of Black people happening in trees. And my family's from Charleston, and like you can just, if you have any sensitivity to spirit activity or anything, you feel that so strongly with the trees there, as many of the trees have been there to witness all of that. But not just the trees, the waterways, the birds. People talk about birds being messengers in particular. And my connection with nature has really helped me to receive messages that have really benefited me. And so just recently, for example, I was in the graveyard getting dirt from a very famous, powerful conjureman's grave named Black Herman. If you guys are not watching my lives or on my newsletter, definitely do so, because the journey with Black Herman is evolving. We're raising money for a headstone because he currently has an unmarked grave, and he is quickly becoming something of a conjure folk saint here for witches in the Northeast that are interested in conjure and hoodoo, kind of similar to the way New Orleans has Marie Laveau. Black Herman is becoming kind of our folk saint. And when I went to the graveyard to obtain his dirt, it was a bird that let me know that I was in the right place, because I was looking for an unmarked grave in a cemetery that is 400 acres with
Wow.
thousands of
Wow.
graves right? So I'm looking for literally a needle in a haystack. I was walking and I was just about to pass it when this bird that I could not see but could hear, and in New York, when we think birds, we pretty much just have pigeons, which get a bad rap as being like not exactly the most glamorous bird. But one thing pigeons don't do is knock on trees. They're not woodpeckers. That's not a part of their thing. And as I was getting ready to pass by this grave, this bird just starts knocking in the tree right next to me. And then I looked up and it stopped. I was like, okay. And then I got ready to walk past that tree again. And I stopped. And I'm like, okay, what is going on? And because I have this relationship with spirit, because I have this relationship with nature, I knew that this wasn't a coincidence. I knew that this bird was talking to me because I have this relationship with the natural world. And so I'm like, okay, what are you trying to tell me, buddy? And I look down and I'm standing on top of a concrete slab.
Wow.
And I look at my map and I figure out I'm right on top of it. And I kept getting ready to walk past it. And this bird made sure that I did not. And it's things like that. It is going out to attend a friend's event and seeing cardinals on the way and knowing that a particular spirit is with me. It's being in spaces where I feel like I really need my grandfather's support. My grandfather was a farmer. He was born to sharecroppers. He grew up incredibly poor in the rural South. And by the time he died, he owned multiple businesses, had enough land to give all 6 of his children their own acre or so plot, and died in a home on a street that's named after him. So he is my example of what it means to take nothing and use your own hard work, your own smarts, and your own desire to help your community, because all of his businesses were oriented around helping the people in the community who could not get that help otherwise, will take you to the highest heights that you can possibly reach. And every time I'm about to make an important business decision or there's something scary that I'm about to do, a daddy long leg spider will show up for me. And that's my symbol for him in the natural world, because he drove this old rickety Volvo that always had daddy long leg spiders. And as a kid driving home from church in the summertime, I'd always be like, there's spiders in your car, man. Because he was a farmer, so he didn't care about things like that, right? So now when I need to make a tough choice or there's something going on business-wise that I need to pay attention to, a daddy long-legged spider will show up. So the natural world for me is a harbinger of messages that I need to receive. And if I didn't have that relationship with it, oh my God. Not a day coming and landing on the windowsill and flying away. That's incredible. There's a blue jay that has been out in our courtyard that my shop witch Alexis noted, because that is one of her messengers that has been showing up. Another bird that is not, they're in the New York area, but that we don't see as much of because we mostly see pigeons. He just came, looked at me, and just left. So as I was saying, the natural world carries messages for me, lets me know when I'm doing something right or when I shouldn't go a certain way or do something. So these are real results in my life. Like going and sitting by a tree is not just because it's like, oh, foofy, wonderful, peaceful time, wah-wah, self-care type stuff. This really impacts my everyday life. It allows me to make better choices. It allows me to have clarity and not be confused, where someone else doesn't know whether or not they're about to do the right thing. I know where to look for signs that I'm on the right path. That for me is what a connection with the seasons, a connection with the natural world has done for me. It makes my life better and it makes my life easier because I'm able to get messages to point me in directions that I otherwise would have to just figure out on my own and take chances on my own and feel really alone while doing it. So I just wanted to share that with people because I
Oh, I
think
love
when it
it.
comes to connecting with nature, of all the things that we talk about in witchcraft, that's one of the ones that seems the least maybe important to people because it can sort of seem very like almost privileged, like, oh great, you have a porch that you can go have your coffee on in the morning. Well, I don't, well, okay, if you don't have a porch, figure something else out,
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
it's going to change your life in a positive way to have a connection with nature. So however you figure out to do it, and whatever time you need to sacrifice to do it, because trust, it's going
Yeah.
to fit you.
And that's why it's like such an individual thing, because it has to fit in with your own circumstances, and your circumstances are going to change over time. And so, when you have that relationship established and your circumstances change, it's easier then because you have already have that relationship. So it's the building the relationship that can be the hard part, but it's like you say, it's so worth it for so many different reasons. And I think, there is that element of self-care, but ultimately witches practice witchcraft to get stuff done. you
Right.
know and so, yeah, that's ultimately a part of it as well. And it's seeing all of those different aspects of it, all of them are true all at once.
Right.
It's very multifaceted, and I think for me that's the beauty of it, because then it allows people to kind of find what works for them. And I always say, take what works for you and discard what doesn't, and move on. Oftentimes you might find you circle back to it later on, or you come back to it when you're ready for that. Well, you might pick it up at a time when you're not open, and it might be any one thing. So, a particular ritual or a way of learning something or some information, when you get it initially, you might not be ready for that. You might have to go on a process of learning and understanding and development, and then come back and, it's like, you see what's in front of you for the first time, because you've got the knowledge and the experience to kind of decode it. And so, yeah, starting the journey is the tough part, but ultimately I think it's tough at first, but it's worth doing. And like most things that are worth doing, sometimes at the moment we're doing them, it's easy to kind of feel or not feel the benefit of why we're doing them. And
Right.
you have to kind of there's an element of trusting in the process as well. But I think once you start, you begin to see almost straight away, there's always things that you can take from a session. And I think we always so in my day job, I work with autistic children, and we're always goal setting for any given moment because of how they feel in any given moment. And so I think that's something that I've brought into my witchcraft practice, and it's that flexibility of understanding what your goals are in that given moment. Okay, ultimately your main goal is to get to that stage where you've got that relationship and you're able to manifest the change you want to see in the world, whatever that may be. But before you get there, you have to have, little manageable goals that show your progress. And I think knowing what you want from going outside in that moment at that time, it's okay to have some expectations as long as they're manageable and they're achievable. I think that's important as well. I think sometimes we forget that witchcraft can be like work at times. you
Mm-hmm.
know
No, facts for sure. And that's okay because
yeah.
there's a result towards the end. And your book, Season Songs, I'll remind everybody, Rediscovering the Magic in the Cycles of Nature, does just that. It is a collection of songs, of rituals, of prayers and practices that you can utilize to help you to connect with nature. So if you're ready to do that work of building a relationship with nature, but maybe are wondering, how can I get started? Emma has compiled a beautiful collection of different tips and practices that you can engage in. And I actually wanted to read just a quick little section that stood out to me to give you guys a little taste of the flavor of this book and what you can, prepare yourself to experience if you get yourself a copy. But Emma says, the seasons are not something that just happens to the natural world. Rather, it is the very world shifting, encompassing the hermetic principle of vibration. Everything is in flux, everything is constantly in motion. The The seasons, then, within the framework of the wheel of the year, are nature in motion. They are the constant ebb and flow of energies that are necessary for life itself. I thought that was a really beautiful way of describing why connecting with the seasons can help you with that larger goal of connecting with vibration and energy, which is ultimately what witches do. We recognize that everything is energy and we use that to our advantage. We allow ourselves to feel our own energy and be able to connect to the energy of different places, people, and things so that we can shift that energy in the direction of our goals. And people often look at what we do as very fantastical and something that's sort of like random, but it's really scientific to me. And so, if you understand that the natural world is a vibration that you can connect with, then shifting vibration doesn't become such a complicated or far away concept. It just sort of makes sense. So, I encourage you guys to get a copy of Emma's new book. It's beautiful, season songs. So definitely take a look and look for it. And we should have it in the shop here soon as well. So check out BronxWitch HeadQuarters for that. Yes, yes, yes. So I think now would be the perfect time to take a few questions while we let folks. I see we've already got some in the chat. If anyone wants to drop in any questions for Emma or myself on seasonal magic, working with nature, now is the time to do so. I will remind everybody that if you are listening in on podcast platforms, one of the perks of subscribing to my YouTube channel, Beyond BronxWitch, is you get to watch the live behind the scenes tapings of each of these episodes, but you also get to participate in the Q&A and have your questions answered. So definitely make sure to subscribe to my channel and tune in to these live tapings so that you can get some one-on-one info from our guest co-hosts. All right, let's take a look at the questions that have come in here. I'm going to scroll back and make sure I don't miss any of them. I see some questions. Yeah, go ahead.
I just love Q&As.
I love that too. I see some questions that are not exactly on the topic of seasonal magic, so I'll come to those at the end. I want to start with Arcana Mysteries question. Any suggestions on how to connect with the ocean? I am surrounded by water. Thank you.
Yes,
For
there
your
are
question, Arcana.
many different ways you can connect with water. Some will involve going out and connecting with it, but there's also things that you can do at home in different ways. So if it's, I think, making an effort to at least visit the local area or your local patch of ocean or your local beach, I think making that effort, and I think you'll have to work with your own routines to find when you can and for how long. And I think having a routine is so important because it means that you're setting aside that space. You're already planning for it. I think doing stuff on the fly is fun, but sometimes when we base our practice on doing stuff just as and when, sometimes that's when it's easily kind of falls to the wayside because we've not scheduled it in. So although scheduling seems very boring, I think it's important to schedule that time, and especially if it involves going somewhere. Because then if you've got it scheduled in, you're more likely to kind of, I don't know, respect it in a way because you're setting aside that time. You've already got it in your mindset that you're going. And I think it just makes it easier to have it scheduled. Could be weekly, it could be monthly. And I think there's no pressure in that. You just kind of have to find what works for you. And it's the same with how long you spend there. It's what works for you. And I think once you get there, there's lots of different things you can do. And I think you should explore all of them. And then, again, it's about giving yourself that time to explore them. So sometimes you might go there and you might just literally become a part of that environment. I think all too often we see ourselves as separate from nature and we're just observers, but really we're a part of it. So just ultimately spending time, even if it's just paddling in the ocean with your feet in the waves, just being a part of it, just standing there and just noticing, I don't know, how the light changes, what the weather feels like. Are you cold? Are you relaxed? Are you comfortable? Do you feel a little bit tingly? Being aware of all of those different energies that you might feel. And once you begin to kind of set that routine up and have that routine, then you can begin to kind of notice how you feel. So once you begin to know what your normal is, that's when you become aware of different shifts. So you might go there one day and think, oh, actually, this feels different to how it normally does. And that's where you begin to pick up the messages that nature has to offer. But first of all, we have to become open to kind of noticing them. It's all well and good, birds and insects and all of the other creatures trying to get our attention if we're too caught up in our own selves to notice them there. So I think ultimately going there and just spending time doing different things. So sometimes you might just go for a walk, other times you might just sketch. I always think drawing is a good way, and you don't have to be an artist. I'm like crap at drawing. Nobody wants to see my pictures, but it just by drawing, I think what you're doing is you're noticing little parts of the land or the ocean, for example, that you might not have noticed before because you're looking at it through the lens of wanting to kind of reflect that onto paper. And so you pick up different things, and you become more open to nuance and in the light and how it reflects on the ocean, or the play of cloud on the surface. There's lots of different things that you might pick up on. So I think thinking about what you might enjoy to do there is also important. I think associating that sense of joy with our natural environments is something we've forgotten to do as adults. And as kids, we've all got great childhood memories probably of some instance in nature, whether that's a tree you used to climb or somewhere you used to go on a bike ride with someone. And I think as adults we lose that sense. So I think just rediscovering our own joy with being in the landscape is an important part of becoming a part of that landscape and building that relationship. So, but link it to what you like to do as well. Otherwise, if it's becomes something that you just do because you think it's going to build that relationship, but you actually detest doing it, I think actually that becomes a detracting force. So think about what you like to do and spend some time doing those things and getting to know, because it's almost like we're building a relationship back up with ourselves as well, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, it does. And I would piggyback off of that and say that when I ask the question of how can I connect with a nature spirit, with a deity, with an ancestor, I try to remind myself that it's no different than creating a relationship with a physical person.
Yes.
I think sometimes we forget that. And
Yeah.
so we are like, how can I connect with this thing? And it's like, well, if you met somebody that you didn't really know that well, but you wanted to get to know them, how would you do that? You would spend time with them, as you said. You would pay attention to the way things change. You would check in with them and see how they're doing. And I think acts of service are a great way to connect
I
with any
agree.
spirit, because if you met somebody that you didn't know, you thought they were really cool, you thought they were powerful, you thought that they could help you in some way, what's one of the first things you would do? You might show up and present them with a gift, show up with flowers or something like that and say, hey, or offer to do something for them to help them out. So if you want to connect with the ocean, you might consider, how could I do acts of service for the ocean? Maybe there are some beach cleanups or
Yes.
some water cleanups that I could
Giving
do.
to
Maybe I
as
could
well.
donate, yeah, to an organization that does that. When I wanted to connect with the spirits of my neighborhood, I started volunteering at my local community garden. There's an organization called Friends of Four Parks that does park cleanups. I did park cleanups with them. We've done daffodil planting. So when you walk through my neighborhood, there are daffodils everywhere, and I know that I planted a bunch of those. And the relationship has reciprocated. Now the animals and the foliage in the neighborhood talk to me. I get
Yeah.
all types of gifts and things from the trees. There's a particular tree that has been very helpful to me and giving me guidance, but also as being a place for me to take my spell work. And so if you wanted to build a relationship with somebody that you thought was really cool, you might start with trying to do something for them to win their favor and get them interested in wanting to know more about you. So always remember that
Yeah.
the
I like
same
that
things that you
as
would
well.
do for meeting a person apply.
Yeah, because I always say, imagine meeting someone and you don't know them very well, but they just keep turning up and asking you for stuff.
Yeah,
You get
exactly. You'd be
pretty
like,
annoyed, and yeah, so it's always the same. So yeah, I think going there with an openness and willingness to do, um, and to see the value in that act of service is important. But yeah,
yeah, absolutely. If you want something from me, you better not show up empty-handed. You know what I'm saying? So the same rules apply. It's we're building relationships.
yes, absolutely.
Um, let's see. We have a question from Jasmine. How could you feel more supported by community?
Oh,
Um, I think I'll jump in here with that one first, and then maybe Emma, you have some
yeah.
thoughts on that. I think the first step is finding a community that's right for you. Would be the first step. And then how you could feel more supported by them, I think, really comes down to letting them support you. I think sometimes we get involved with communities, whether they're virtual or in person, and we expect them to like go out of their way to figure out what our problems are or what we need. And no one's a mind reader, and that's not anybody's job. So if you find a community that you like, it's up to you to actively engage and interact and tell people what you need. Hey, I would really love to have friends that I could go to festivals with. Hey, I really feel like I can't be a full witch because the people around me don't accept my views on this. What do you guys think about this? The first step is finding a community that really resonates with you and who you are, and then the second step is actively engaging. So I see a lot of like passive engagement in our own virtual community where people join, but then just sort of like hover there.
Mm.
And your community can't support you if they don't know that you need support or how you need it. So make sure you're communicating that to the community that you find so that they can step up and provide you with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you just have to use a bit of discernment when finding those communities, because I think sometimes, particularly when we're quite new on our witchcraft practice, and you really want to make those connections because it's so exciting, and you want, especially if you don't have people already that you can talk to about, all these things that you're interested in. So when you do find a group, it's easy to want to dive right in. But I think, you know, we do have to be mindful of our own safety and our own well-being, and we have to use discernment with groups. And I think some things to always consider are, groups shouldn't be places where you're afraid to ask questions. I think a healthy community thrives on questions and overcoming those questions or answering them, and then problem solving to continue to build that community in a way that is respectful and serves all of the members of that community. So I think we do have to be a bit careful, especially when we're new and we're so eager to learn stuff. And it is a learning curve, and you soon learn to maybe pick up a few signs of, where you might need to tread a little bit more lightly, or where you might think, actually, do you know what, this group isn't for me. And it's okay to say, this group necessarily isn't with me. Sometimes we don't know that, and sometimes we just don't align with that community because actually it doesn't fit with what we might want. So I think, again, it's using your own discernment to kind of consider your feelings, explore the benefits of what you get from that community. And I think, it's okay to be parts of different communities for different reasons. I think when we talk about community, we think about just this big thing called community that we're a part of just by being witches, and there is an element of that, but you can also break it down, and there's lots of little subsets. And so don't be afraid. And again, I relate it to real life. So, I might have a certain group of friends who I might go clubbing with, and I might have a different set of friends who I might go, hiking with, or whatever. So we get different things from different relationships, and that's not a bad thing. So I think, don't be afraid to kind of explore where your interests lie within witchcraft, and explore some of those smaller communities where you might feel more comfortable. And then I think it's that process of, once you find your feet and you get a little bit more confident in yourself and your own practice, and a little bit more sure of perhaps what your practice is, I think it just gives you that confidence to then broach those wider communities in a way where you feel you have something to offer, because I think a lot of witches, old and new, suffer from imposter syndrome a lot of the time. So
Right.
they you know, they definitely are worthy of being in those spaces, but they might not feel like they are. And I think, you know, doing that work of building it up slowly can help to overcome that to some extent.
Yeah, absolutely. We have another question on the topic of community, so I think we'll jump here next. Val Antonia wants to know specifically when it comes to obia, for those who are not on the island like themselves, what do you suggest in terms of finding community? Val Antonia has been hanging around drum circles and it's been fun, but nothing yet.
Yeah, especially like obia in itself is really difficult as well,
Yeah,
because
it's a lot more secretive. Yeah.
whereas some of like the other African based spiritualities that we're more familiar with are kind of enjoying a resurgence, and you know, it's not the same with obia. In fact, the opposite is true. It's becoming less and less, and I think so it is difficult anyway, particularly to find that obia community. But I think there are people out there, and I think it's just a case of, you know, social media has such a bad rep, but in these instances it can just be, you know, a place where you can leapfrog, you know. So you might join one group, and actually through different resources you might go to different places, and you begin to get to know different people. You know, I think one of the things that, and I think community building obia is really important to me, because there was a talk I listened to by the author Eugenie O'Neill, I think her name is, of race, racism and obia. And it explores obia through the colonial history of Jamaica. um and you know, I watched a talk she gave, and it made me really sad when she talked about the trend of obia becoming less and less well known, you know, with fewer and fewer practitioners. And I thought that was really sad. So I run a course every year or two, and I take, you know, a handful of students, and through that I've begun to kind of start building those small community aspects. But you know, to be honest, I wouldn't be honest if I said, you know, that there's lots of community, because there's not. And part of it is the very nature of obia. It is a solitary practice. So, you know, there's no kind of conventions of obia practitioners. You know, most of the interactions I've had have come through the internet and online spaces. And then through some of those, I've developed friendships with people who are closer, you know, and it can come from there. But it's just a case of exploring. But again, you know, it's one of those things that, because the resources are so scarce, that when you find them, it's easy to get overexcited and overwhelmed with it, because actually you found something. So again, it's just a case of using discernment. But I always think, take what works for you, discard the rest. But yes, obia is particularly difficult for several reasons. Partly the history of it, partly because outside of the island, even in the island, you know, you'd be hard pressed to find someone who would admit to a stranger that they practice obia, you know. But away
Yeah.
from the island, you've got that problem of it being such a lesser known practice anyway, that practitioners are just few and far between. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it can start with online spaces, and you can reach out to people. And I always think, going into discussions with an open mind, and you know, discussions and healthy debate in the proper sense of the word debate, rather than just online arguments and hot takes and stuff. I think that can really help, you know, help with that discernment of that, just, yes, this group's for me, or you know, perhaps this isn't for me, but it's given me somewhere else I can explore.
Yeah, absolutely. And I dropped a resource in the chat, a practitioner that I know that is a hoodoo practitioner, but also has obia in her family line. So it's pretty amazing because she's got hoodoo on one side and obia on the other side. I'm like, "Ah, that's like the dream, to have like two family lineages that are both magical. Like that's amazing." But Queen Cotalia of Conjure South in Mobile, Alabama, is somebody to check out. They have a YouTube page, they're on Instagram. I think just as Queen Co, but her full name is Kotalia. And she has a shop in Mobile, Alabama called Conjure South, but also a Hoodoo Institute, which is like a graduate program. And she does a lot of teaching, and her teaching, interestingly, focuses more on hoodoo. And I would be curious to find out from her why that is. Maybe it's because a lot of people don't know about Obia, or maybe she has a particular sort of protectiveness about it, and things like that. But for whatever reason, she does focus quite a bit on hoodoo, but she is one of the one Obia practitioners that has a lot of personal experience and family experience on that particular magical practice. And so if she's got an online community, Valentonia, that might be a great place to start. I would definitely follow Queen Co and get active and involved in whatever she's got going on, because you'll probably find some other Obia practitioners there, or she might be somebody who can give you further ideas of how to connect with somebody, especially because I know Valentonia is down in Miami. So, she's down in the South as well. And then we had just one other question. I'm going to go back up to Jasmine's other question about Black Herman. And I actually, you know what? I'm going to real quick. I did see another question that was a little bit more directed towards you, Emma. So we'll go here first. Jasmine asked, who are some witches from history or folklore that inspired you? Now, Jasmine came into the conversation halfway through, so she missed your talk about the woman from the Maroons, right?
Nanny of the Maroons, yes.
Yes. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that witch from history, a little bit more for folks who might have come in late.
Yes. Oh, yes. I love Nanny of the Maroons, and I often give talks about her because, witches, I love the stories of witches and magical practitioners who are fierce and, who are fighters and who overcome in the face of, I'm a natural supporter of underdogs anyway. So, and this is the best underdog story of them all. So Nanny of the Maroons was an enslaved woman from Ghana, and she found herself in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, at that time, which was ruled by the British, who'd before it'd been colonized by the Spanish, but at this time it was ruled by the British. And Jamaica and the rest of the Caribbean is a particularly bloodied history. It's born out of violent bloodshed and change, and I think the people who endured that, it doesn't even bear thinking about. It's hard for us in our modern age, even with all the problems we have, to kind of comprehend, just how truly awful it was. And so I think this is what makes her story in particular more powerful. So she was enslaved, worked plantations, and she escaped with other enslaved people. But she was also an Obia practitioner. And so they used guerrilla warfare tactics. She became like one of the best military leaders of her time, and she is renowned. She's well known for. She's almost single-handedly credited with taking down, and winning freedom from the British. Overpowering the British army, which was better equipped, better trained, had just more resources. So they escaped into the mountains, and the Maroons. There is still the Maroon community in the Jamaican mountains today. Whose ancestors, Nanny Maroon is their ancestor, and so it's just so powerful that she was able to lead a community to overcome such brutal hardship, ultimately defeating the British. They signed treaties granting them their freedoms and granting them the land in the mountains, and ultimately protecting. They were no longer kind of well, not necessarily no longer, because racism and colonialism was still going on, but she defeated them and won freedom for her and her people. And I think Obia has the power, and I think magic and witchcraft has the power to bring people together, believers and disbelievers, and it gives people somebody to look up to. I think witches generally are always seen as on the edges of society. They're the people that the community maybe avoid in good times but go to in bad times when they need help,
Mm,
when all other sources maybe are no longer effective.
that part, okay. Yes, we're on the fringes of society until you need something.
Yes. And but I also think that's how they like it as well.
Yeah,
You
yeah, there's definitely some of that.
so stay away from all of that bull crap. So, but for me, so I love that essence that actually she was this girl who had been terribly abused, separated from family and from all that she knew, endured some of the most awful hardship that we couldn't even comprehend, and yet she overcame all of that with the power of magic and witchcraft to lead people. And I think one of the best stories that I love about her is that one of her legends goes that one day a British soldier saw her on some hilltop or other, and she was had her back to him and was doing something, and he took aim with his rifle and shot at her, and the bullet hit her. And the story goes, or the legend goes, that she caught the bullet in her bum cheeks, in her buttocks, and so was unharmed. I think that's my favourite legend. In truth, she was a master guerrilla warfare strategist. And so, this was just one of her many ways of outing, the positions of the British who, and when you think about the hills of Jamaica and the mountains of Jamaica, they're shrouded in jungle, like the bush is thick and it's heavy, and it would have been so alien to those poor British soldiers who were ultimately poor boys who were fighting some rich man's war anyway,
Mhm.
and they would
Yeah.
have been terrified anyway in those conditions, because it would have been just so different from what they were used to. And to imagine, seeing Nanny and her fighters emerge with their camouflage, like God, yes.
But it was
I think her
horrifying.
story
Yes.
is just so powerful.
Yeah, but shout out to the power of the bootay.
Yes.
Okay. I love that story. That's hilarious and also really cool. And I believe it. I know it's a legend, but
Yeah. They
you know
always have
what?
a grain of truth somewhere.
Exactly. That's really cool. I think Bob Marley's wife was saved from an assassination attempt from her by her locks.
Oh, I
That's a
love
that's a
that.
story that we know, that like the thickness
Yeah.
of her locks actually prevented her from being killed basically by this
Wow.
bullet that hit her in the head. So yeah, and when those things happen, it's easy to chalk it up to like coincidence, but I don't know, the booty is like definitely one of the magical powers of the African woman, if you ask me.
Indeed. I agree.
So that doesn't sound accidental at all. So real quick, on the last question that I'm seeing, also from Jasmine on Black Herman. I'm not super well educated. Do you have any tips on where I can learn more? Yes, absolutely. First of all, Black Herman was the Houdini of his time, living during the Harlem Renaissance. He was an incredibly famous magician and illusionist, but he was also a legitimate hoodoo and conjure man. And so he'd be on the stage, touring around the country, doing magical shows and working spells for people, on the side. So you can actually find a lot of information about him online. He's not that difficult to research about. There was a fiction book written with him as the main character called Mumbo Jumbo, and it is a fiction book, so it's very sensationalized. But he also wrote a book, which I'm very happy to say is coming to the shop. We are going to have copies of his book, which is a grimoire on hoodoo and conjure, with his own tips and spells and recipes in it, and his thoughts on magical practice. So get excited for that. If you grab that somewhere else, if you want to support HQ, our little metaphysical bookstore, keep an eye out. We should have those books in April, along with some consecrated candles and prayer cards that have all been dressed with his graveyard dirt, which I had the honor of obtaining for my hoodoo teachers. And my hoodoo teachers have taken that dirt turned it into an incredible powder, and have consecrated candles and prayer cards with it. So we'll be sharing a lot more information of Black Herman. So make sure you're on my newsletter. The link is in the description. I have already talked quite a bit about my experience in the graveyard obtaining the dirt in my lives here on this channel, and I'll be posting some of those clips as separate videos, so stay tuned for that. And just I'll be sharing more of my experience and my hoodoo teachers, Brother Moses and Doc Cosmic Nuage, experience with invoking this very powerful conjurman, and our efforts to raise money for his headstone so that the next witch looking for him doesn't have to wait for a bird to tell them that they're in the right place. There will be a headstone, and we are basically venerating this spirit to something of the level of folk saint for us. So it's a very cool process that we're in the middle of. So definitely stay tuned for more information, and make sure to follow me on all the sites and all the things. All right. Cool. So I think that is the last question that I see coming in. So before we let Emma go, Emma, I want to thank you so much for being here. And I want you to take a moment, if you don't mind, to let the folks know, let the witches know where they can find more information about you, and if you have any projects coming up that we should be looking out for.
Yes, of course. Well, thank you for having me. I've had a great time, and thank you for all your questions. I love a good Q&A. I'm on most social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram. It's Emma Kathryn Wild Witch. Same for Twitter. I am on TikTok, but perhaps less active on there. But it's Emma Kathryn Wild Witch everywhere. The website is EmmaKathrynWildWitchcraft.com. And of course, you can check out Llewellyn for my books, and also Gods and Radicals Press as well. I do lots of writing for their website, so there's lots of free access stuff too.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. It has been so incredible having you with us today. I learned a lot about the topic of seasonal magic, being a better seasonal witch. And from me and all of the Better Witches, I'm very, very grateful for the time you spent with us here today and all of the knowledge that you shared, because when we know better, we witch better. All right. Thank you so much. Yay! I appreciate you being here, Emma. Thank you. This was amazing. Just so you know, this episode is available right now on my YouTube channel, Beyond BronxWitch. So if you want to share it with folks, if you want to let people know where they can check it out, please feel free to do so. And I will be following up with you in a couple of weeks with a link to the podcast version of the conversation, which will be an edited version of the conversation. And you're free to, share that with folks if you'd like as well. And I'd love to keep in touch with you, and, maybe have you back in the future if you're working on anything else.
Yeah.
I'd love to have you through.
I think one of the best things about doing all of this is the community aspect. And,
Yeah.
This is all community building. So absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'll remind you, I'm going to go ahead and remove you from the studio. And when that happens, it's probably going to tell you to wait a few minutes to let everything upload. And then once you get the green check, then you're good to go. And I really appreciate you hanging out to let the episode finish uploading for you.
No worries.
All right. Have a beautiful rest of the day. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. All right, guys. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to go ahead and take care of sharing our outro. But before I do, I want to thank all of you guys for hanging out and checking out this behind the scenes taping of the season 3 episode, Be a Better Seasonal Witch, with Emma Kathryn. Thanks for your questions and all that good stuff. Make sure to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Like this video and tell everybody you know about it. You can use the link to share it in your stories, share it with your friends. Let's make sure everybody knows about these important conversations, because I really do believe that hearing other witches talk about their experience is going to help everybody on this journey just go about it a little bit better. So thank you guys for being here. Thank you, witches, for tuning in to this episode of Season 3 of the Better Witch podcast. Remember, no matter where you're tuning in from, we want to know what you think about today's episode. So make sure to leave us a review wherever you are. A special thank you to our sponsors who made this episode possible. You can support this podcast by grabbing some sweet merch over in the Beyond BronxWitch merch shop, sponsoring an episode with an ad spot, or following us on Instagram at BetterWitch Podcast. Remember, witches, when we know better, we witch better. See you in the next episode, and blessed be. All right. Thank you guys so much for being here. We are going to be meeting with, I've got 2 more episodes for this season. Just so you know, we're going to be meeting next week with Maria Bomani, the author of Conjuring the Calabash. We're going to be talking all about conjure magic and going about learning about conjure better. So if you're interested in conjure, interested in hoodoo, root work, that's going to be one to tune into. And then we're going to be closing out the season with the notable, very esteemed Ivo Dominguez Jr., who is going to be here to talk all about how to be a better Zodiac witch. He is the author of the series of Zodiac witch signs, Leo witch, which I am a contributor to. Libra witch, Cancer witch, etc. I think there's 3 more in the series that are coming out before the end of the year, and we're going to talk all about how you can tap into your zodiac sign power to improve your magical crafting and things of that nature. So 2 more really awesome episodes coming up. Make sure to stay tuned, subscribe, turn on your notifications so you're notified when we get live, and you can listen to these episodes on all podcast platforms. Season 3 is now airing. Episode 2 just aired last night. So definitely tune in to the audio version of these episodes if you like to listen to podcasts. All right. Thank you guys so much. Have a great rest of the day and blessed be. Bye.